More than 100 students at the University of San Diego may pursue legal action against the school's tuition policy during the pandemic. Fox 5 legal analyst Wendy Patrick explains why that is now a part of a growing trend. Wendy, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning, Shali.
Okay,
Yes, a growing trend indeed. And it's not a surprise. You know, the college experience is meant to be both substantive and social. And at that age group, many of them focus on the latter. But it hasn't turned out that way this semester, nor the summer semester. So what we've seen nationwide is many schools and many students are deciding whether or not to challenge the amounts of money they paid for what ended up being a virtual college experience. Not that virtual isn't valuable, but you cannot recreate in a Zoom room what you could actually experience in a classroom.
Ain't that the truth? Okay, we have a local school, USD, we have Yale, we have other schools. They are saying, and we know college tuition, it is not cheap. It is very, very expensive. So I got to imagine as a college student, I come forward, I'm paying thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to go to school. And now I'm being told, go take your class Zooming. Do I have a case, a legitimate case to bring forth?
Well, Shali, as you learned in law school, timing matters when it comes to contract obligations. Did some of these students that are asking for what we'll call a tuition petition, let me pay less, did they sign up for college at a time in which we already knew we were going virtual? That has turned out to make a significant difference in some of the schools, particularly in the Midwest, that had to cancel some of these overseas experiences, for example. When you look at the contract language, it actually exempted some types of unforeseeable events. Some of them even said epidemic. Nobody said pandemic, quote unquote. But whether or not these students are able to get some sort of relief or a break on the tuition will largely depend on what they paid, when they paid it, and what the expectations or the knowledge of the virus were at that time. And I think that's going to vary school by school, semester by semester. But you are correct that trend is sweeping the nation because everybody is currently impacted.
Oh, those contracts and the fine print. I should have stayed in law school for the longer than three months that I was there, because you would understand that those words and what you sign when it comes to the legal world, those little words matter. And sometimes I don't think, Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, people are really paying attention. Like, who thought we were going to be in a pandemic?
You know, we went through the same thing, Shelley, when the airlines were imposing these strange rules that were in that contract of carriage link that nobody clicked on. Well, so too here. But in the larger scheme of things, it is true that it's undeniable that students are not getting the experience that they signed up for. I also think, Shelley, that it depends on what your major is. You can imagine there are certain things that are maybe ideally suited to Zoom class, virtual interaction. But what if it's chemistry? You can't dissect a frog or mix chemicals in a Zoom room. There are certain things that you just can't do online. And then the question would be, does that hold up the student's education? Will that then hold up economic opportunities? And will somebody be lifelong disadvantaged because they weren't able to take advantage of what they paid for? And then, of course, the policy argument. We always had to talk about this. No doubt you learned this in those 3 months in law school. In the grand scheme of things, is it fair? Is it fair to say that you signed up for A and we had to switch to B when the schools are saving money, maybe in some sense, by not having the lights on? We can go through some of the practical realities. Shouldn't that saving be passed to students? So that's sort of framing the narrative on both sides of this debate. But you have to imagine other industries are watching very closely because they're in the same boat.
You know, speaking of other industries and fair, I know there are a lot of attorneys up in arms with the announcement, what was it, last week, that anybody graduating law school, they can get a temporary license during this time. They don't have to sit for the bar during this time. Am I not correct? Because I saw a lot of attorneys who were really upset with us, saying that's not fair. We went to school, we took the exam, and now they get to practice temporarily.
Right. It's hard to think of this temporary practice when you're talking about practicing law. But the minute I say that, I'm reminded that that's the same thing they did in the medical profession, because they needed some of those trainees who hadn't quite yet achieved their degrees on the front lines dealing with patients. So then it begs the larger question, do you accelerate a degree program maybe prematurely because of the pandemic? And if so, is that fair to the rest of us that went through, however many years of school, 3 days of the bar exam? There's equities on both sides to be weighed, and there's good arguments on both sides as well. And we're really in novel territory here. All we can do is sort of go day by day. But some of the students that we're talking about with the tuition wars right now, they're asking the same questions. Maybe they don't get a break on the tuition, but do they have to take less units? Do they take less classes, less types of classes? How do we make it fair, Shali? How can this be justice? That's really the bottom line in all of these examples.
Before I let you go real quick, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis, Shali, because there are some schools in which people that are challenging tuition already knew they were going to be virtual. And then others, especially with a big practicum component to the classes, there's no way you can recreate that virtually. So those students may have a better case of a break in tuition than some that maybe it's, computer programming or something that you can actually do virtually. But I guarantee you we're going to be talking about it again because these lawsuits have just started rolling in.
All right, Wendy Patrick, thank you. Always good to see you.
Thanks, Shelley.